Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. You guys sent in some really interesting cases this week, but the one we're diving into today, well, let's just say it's a story that never really went cold. It's the Menendez brothers.
And it's a big one, right? I mean, 35 years after they were convicted of murdering their parents, there's a chance they might actually walk free.
Seriously, 35 years. It's insane. So for anyone who maybe wasn't glued to their TVs back in '89 when this all went down, basically we're talking about Lyle and Erik Menendez.
21 and 18 at the time.
Right, 21 and 18. They shot their parents in their Beverly Hills mansion, claimed self-defense, said it was years of abuse that drove them to it.
And that claim of abuse, especially the allegations of sexual abuse by their father, that's really the crux of it all, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes this case so fascinating, right? Because it wasn't just about the crime itself. It was about what the jury believed or didn't believe about the abuse.
Absolutely. And in the original trials, remember, a lot of that testimony, that really damning stuff about the abuse, it was deemed inadmissible. The prosecution, they argued it was all a big act, just a way for the brothers to inherit the family millions.
Which, by the way, was no small chunk of change.
Yeah,
right?
no, you're talking about something like $14 million. So yeah, the prosecution, they really hammered home this image of these spoiled rich kids more interested in a big payday than justice for their parents.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward 35 years, and suddenly this case that everyone thought was over and done is back in the spotlight. Why now?
Well, two pretty major pieces of evidence have come to light.
Okay, hit me with it.
First, there's a handwritten letter, Erik to his cousin, apparently written just a couple months before the murders. And in it, he describes the abuse.
So like a diary entry or something?
Sort of, yeah. But a lot more credible as far as evidence goes.
Right, because you can easily claim abuse after the fact, right? I mean, especially if you're trying to avoid a life sentence.
Exactly. But to have something like this letter, allegedly written before the murders even took place, it adds a whole other layer of complexity. Like, this wasn't just a story they made up after the fact.
I get it. But I have to say, reading about this Roy Rosello thing, that was wild. For those who don't know, we're talking about Roy from Menudo.
Yeah, huge pop group back in the 80s.
Right, Menudo. He claims that José Menendez, the father, drugged and raped him years ago.
He actually first said it publicly in a documentary last year, but now it's official. He's filed a sworn affidavit.
Wow. So how does that play into everything? I mean, that's huge.
It's massive. We're not just talking about the word of two brothers against their dead father anymore. This is someone completely removed from the family drama, accusing José Menendez of sexual assault.
So it's like this is backing up the brothers' claims.
Potentially. And it raises questions about a pattern of behavior. It makes José Menendez's character central to the case, even though he's gone.
I see why this is all coming to a head now, especially with Gascón as the DA. He seems to be pretty vocal about his views on criminal justice, right?
Right, Gascón. He's definitely got a different approach. I mean, he's all about criminal justice reform, looking at the bigger picture.
Which is a pretty far cry from the tough on crime era that this case was originally tried in, right?
Oh, totally. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was all about law and order. Rehabilitation wasn't really on the table, especially in a case like this.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I remember the media frenzy around their spending habits after the murders. The designer clothes, the trips. It all fit into this narrative that they were just entitled rich kids who got away with murder.
Absolutely. And frankly, back then, claiming abuse, especially for young men, it wasn't really something people talked about. Definitely not as openly as they do now.
So you're saying that in today's world, a jury might be more sympathetic to the brothers' claims, especially with this new evidence from Rosello.
It's possible. We've come a long way in understanding things like coercive control, the psychological impact of abuse, especially on young people. It's not just about physical scars, right? Trauma manifests in all sorts of ways.
Right. So how does Gascon's whole approach to criminal justice play into this?
Well, he is a big believer in rehabilitation over punishment. He's said as much publicly, and he's particularly passionate about cases with mitigating circumstances like we're seeing here.
So give me the rundown. What are the possible outcomes in this case? Could the Menendez brothers actually walk free?
It's a long shot, but it's not impossible. They could have their sentences vacated, which essentially throws out the original verdict. It doesn't happen often, but with this new evidence and Gascón at the helm, it's in the realm of possibility.
Wow, so they could just walk out of prison after 35 years.
Theoretically, yes. Though a more likely scenario might be a resentencing, maybe with a chance of parole, given how much time they've already served.
Okay, that makes more sense. What about a whole new trial? Is that something that could happen?
It's definitely on the table, but it'd be a whole other can of worms. Imagine having to relitigate all that old evidence, plus the new stuff from Rosillo, through a completely modern lens.
Mhm.
It'd be fascinating to see how a jury today would view everything.
Totally. Because it feels like we're almost looking at this case with fresh eyes now,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's not just about the Menendez brothers anymore.
You got it. This case is bigger than them now. It's about how we understand abuse, trauma, and how those things factor into the legal system. Gascon's involvement just throws gasoline on that fire.
It's like this whole case is forcing us to rethink how we define justice, you know,
Hmm.
especially when you're dealing with these really complex, messy situations.
No doubt. And whatever Gascon decides to do, it's going to have huge implications. Like, imagine if the Menendez brothers get resentenced, or worse, they're just
Yeah.
released. That sets a pretty major precedent.
Oh, totally. You'd see similar cases popping up left and right. People would be challenging old convictions, arguing for new trials.
Exactly. This case could totally change the game when it comes to sentencing reform, especially for cases involving abuse.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around. And I think it's easy to get lost in the legal back and forth, but at the end of the day, there are two victims here, Jose and Kitty Menendez.
Right. Their story, it's a reminder that every case, no matter how famous it becomes, it always starts with real people, real families, real loss.
It makes you think about the ripple effect, you know, not just on the brothers, but on everyone who knew these families.
It's not just about laws and courts, right? It's about the human cost of all of it, the crime, the abuse, and how we try to find justice, even if it takes decades.
It really makes you think. So much has changed since 1989, but somehow, this case, it still feels relevant.
It shows you sometimes the most fascinating mysteries, they're not about who did it, they're about why they did it, and what that says about us.
Well said. We'll definitely be keeping a close eye on this one. We'll see what Gascon decides to do and what it means for the future of justice in America. Until then, keep those theories coming because there's always another deep dive on the horizon.